And I have to say that I'm very sad for not being able to join you in person, because I could see so many lovely discussions are happening, and I'm somehow feel so isolated from this side. I would just like to ask the technical team, is it possible to share one very short presentation, maybe just to ease in my speech, if it is possible? So first of all, I would also like to thank to my colleagues and other speakers on this panel, because you really, how shall I say, you really taught me a lot of things that I didn't know about how the system goes and how the history teaching goes in Albania. And I'm very grateful, and I really hope that we can exchange a lot of ideas and a lot of things. And therefore, on the only thing that I can do and to contribute to this panel and to this conference is at least to share some of the things that we are doing in Serbia, and also that I'm doing not only in Serbia, but let's say in, let's say post-Yugoslav space. And we faced, there are similarities and there are differences, of course, but maybe some of our mechanisms and tools that at least my colleagues and I developed maybe can be useful, for instance. Well, I got a chance also to speak yesterday, and when I was talking, I shared with you some of my concerns, how if not planned very well, it can always, whatever you teach, it can go to a completely wrong direction. But as I like to stress, these topics, as as the previous speakers also said, they're very sensitive and still quite socially controversial. So what I always suggest to my students, and what I do it on my own as well, is to try to lean on the competencies for democratic culture. And this is something that I always come back to it, something that Council of Europe teams developed in very thorough way. And this is something that, combine everything what we should achieve in history teaching, but also in teaching other humanities. On one hand, these are values and attitudes, and on the other, skills and knowledge and critical understanding. So these two things are very, very important, and we have to always have all of them in mind in order to keep our teaching and learning of our students in the best way possible. Furthermore, I wanted to also share with you some of the, as I said, I will do my best to be as concrete, as brief, as precise, and I hopefully as useful as possible. Some of the things that I'm always suggesting to my students, but also something that came out from my research. What would be the, how shall I say, the things to have in mind in order to have and to conduct a successful lesson on topics that have certain dose of controversy, and of course that are so sensitive as we could see from this case. First of all, what I also mentioned yesterday is always to carefully set your educational aims. What do you want to achieve, and why? This is like the top question, the key question that we always have to have in mind. Second thing is to reflect on the outcomes we want to reach, and both cognitive and affective ones. And why do I mention this? Is now, as in the introduction it was said, I was working, and now hopefully it will be published very soon, one teacher's manual with Euroclear organization, how to teach controversial and sensitive issues. And we did a lot of interviews, and we spoke with a lot of teachers, and we noticed one thing, that somehow there is that, how shall I say, that affective aims trap, or in other words, sometimes now especially teachers put a lot of focus into developing only effective outcomes and effective aims, which can which is very important and very useful, but without historical thinking and analytical skills, your students can become more subject to emotions and maybe some further manipulation. You are not manipulating them, of course, but it can make them more sensible and sensitive, maybe to something that can be done by politicians, media, or in some other subject, in some other topic. So it's very important to have somehow in mind that it can be also dangerous only focusing, as it is dangerous of only focusing on cognitive aims and, you know, that disciplinary knowledge. So it's very important to have in mind that perfect balance between these two, as of course the competencies for democratic culture are presenting us. Secondly, now we are talking about the selection of sources, and it is very important. You as a teacher, we as a teacher, I as a teacher, my role is to, you know, help them in that selection. What is suitable for them, what is not suitable according to their, you know, like cognitive skills, but also their age. Of course, it is very, you know, sometimes it's not just in, you know, it can be sometimes some sources can be too shocking, but maybe you can produce the same or even bigger effect if you're using something that is appropriate to their age. But also we have to teach students different methods and approaches of their analysis. For instance, especially if you're talking about, you know, like inclusion of the documents from these archives that are open, it's very important to explain them how to analyze those sources, and maybe to introduce multi-perspectivity or as approach, and help them to also analyze different kinds of sources, to compare them, as I think also one of the previous speakers mentioned. Secondly, if we go to that direction, it is also very important, for instance, to help them with oral history, to teach them how to approach the interviews and to talk to the personal stories and families. Because, you know, you mentioned, and I also found out, well, in Serbia and, you know, former Yugoslavia, if you're talking about, you know, especially of the 90s and of course also of the socialist times, it's usually family is the main source. But our role as a teacher is also to help them to embrace, respect, but also to have that critical attitude toward the personal stories that are very important part of the puzzle, but they have to be compared and put together with other sources as well. The fourth thing, which is I think all the studies proved, that engaging students to participate more and to do research on their own will definitely improve the knowledge they obtain. You know, they have to be active in that process, and this is something that whenever we are planning our lesson activities, we should include. And finally, I wanted to share with you something. It is actually the quote from one article called "Shifting Out of Neutral." It is the article written by a teacher. Well, I'm not sure. I think that he's not a history teacher, but still a teacher who was talking about subjectivity and objectivity inside the classroom. And I will just use this quote. If there is interest to read more, I can share with the organizers the link, so they can spread it more. Because me personally, I also had a problem of how, you know, oh, I have to be objective in the classroom, but somehow you can never skip from your subjectivity. And especially in the stories, and if you're supposed to teach this part of history, which is somehow our part of history, part of our lives, you cannot neglect it, and it's good to embrace it, but to put it on the right pillars. And this is what he said: my goal is for my students to learn to think how I think, but not necessarily what I think. And, you know, I think it's good to have something like this on the mind while preparing the lesson plan about the sensitive and controversial recent past. And instead of some conclusion, maybe I would like to share with you one, let's say, example of a good practice, or at least for now, it's example of a good practice. It is one project called Belgrade Adventure, or Belgrade Tour. This is the project. Okay, maybe I can do like this, stop sharing, and to share something else with you. This is, okay. Not this one. Oh, wait. Yeah. I hope that you can see this website. This project started as a secondary school project in one grammar school in Belgrade during COVID. And actually, I'm not directly engaged into this project, but it is done by my colleagues that are together with me in education for the 21st century. So they needed somehow to engage their students to, like study during COVID times. So they decided to start a project where students will be researchers. Students were supposed to to do research, write articles, take photographs, but also to do the technical stuff like setting the website. And later on, that website turned out to be a mobile phone application. And now, if you come to Belgrade, this is maybe the most, how shall I say, the most useful application for discovering cultural and historical heritage of Belgrade. So, as I said, the floor is given to students, but these tours, from they seem very touristic in a way, but there are some of the topics are very controversial and some of them are very sensitive. And this was one of the ways how the teachers actually approached these topics. They literally left the floor. They gave them, they helped them, they facilitate the process of selection of sources, of doing research, helping with the method, how to analyze the sources, but let them provide their own analysis and their own results. One of the tours, for instance, they're like personal stories where they needed to do the oral history, but also to compare it with other multiple sources. And some of these people were very, how shall I say, both important, notable figures, but some of them were persecuted by different regimes, and they needed to face this kind of history of their own city as well. There's also walking tours, for instance, about socialist Yugoslav times, so also rethinking different things. And for instance, there is also maybe one of the most controversial was about the dark side of Belgrade, where they needed to discover the places of political assassinations from the 19th century, but also until the 21st century, when in 2003, Serbian prime minister was killed while on duty. So as I said, the responses that we got from the students, I'm now not talking about that the other outcomes of this project that turned out to be very useful in some other touristic things, is that they actually found a way to face controversies and sensitivity in one quiet, not dangerous way. And to be honest, now we included university students from the history department, faculty of philosophy in Belgrade, who are now tutoring the high school students. So one very broad basis was made for discovering more and more, and now of course getting into more and more problematic issues. So that would be everything from me. But if you have any question, I'm here and open to speak more about this project, but also different things that we are working and trying to cope with all the problems that recent history is bringing to us. Thank you so much.